Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Venture Fuel Visionaries podcast. I'm your host, Fred Schonberg. I'm so excited today to have Alexander Holt of Seraphim. Alexander has gone on the spectrum from GovTech to SpaceTech and has so many different accolades and accomplishments throughout that journey, which we will talk about as part of this interview. But Alexander, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Well, Fred, thank you so much, and very kind of you to have me on your podcast.
So for our listeners, can you maybe level set them? What is Seraphim Space?
Sure. So Seraphim is a space investment house. So we are a fund manager that invests and focuses on early stage space tech companies. So we set up in 2016 with the world's first space tech venture fund. And then we followed that in 2021 with the world's first listed space tech fund. So if we think about the journey of a space tech startup, we can help them at their growth, we can help them at their venture stage, but also we have an accelerator. So we can go right in at the start and help early stage companies on their journey through that.
Why invest in space tech, and why now? What attracted you to this space?
Well, so why space? Why now? Primarily two things have happened in the past decade. Firstly, that the costs of launch, so essentially putting hardware up into space, has come down by tenfold. In fact, if you look since 1980s, it's come down 100-fold. And that is largely down to SpaceX and the reusable rockets that they've developed over the last decade. So you have this price drop in cost of launch. At the same time, you've then had this proliferation of satellite production. So whether it's Starlink or other small sat producers, you've got much more hardware, many more satellites up in orbit. And what that's done is created this proliferation of data. So it's been cheaper to put the hardware up. You now have a whole lot of data, and then you couple that with the whole AI revolution, and the two marry very, very well. So that's what's happening in space right now.
And for you, what attracted you to the space? Was it this moment in time, moving from government tech, which we'll talk about in a moment, into space? I'm curious what led you into this realm.
Well, there were two reasons. One, and part of my personal philosophy, is that positive relationships circulate and percolate, and you never know when great relationships resurrect. And that was the case in joining Seraphim, which I did in the fall of 24. And they're actually joining a friend, Rob Desborough, who's one of the partners, whose accelerator program I had been through back in 2018. 2006. And when they set up their accelerator program in 2018, they came to visit the accelerator program that I'd set up for government up in Scotland. So part of it was a personal relationship. The other bit was actually what's the domain. And if you look at what is the future of technology for mankind, space is where it's at. And if you think about, so if I go back to my GovTech days, so 10 years spent in government working with early stage companies, helping them navigate those the vagaries of the public sector and those procurement channels. Essentially, GovTech is a broad umbrella, and it's made up of defense, transport, cyber, health, education, all these verticals that go to serve public services.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look at that broad umbrella and then substitute the word space in replacing gov, and you look at SpaceTech is no longer a vertical. it's a horizontal made up of several verticals: defense, transport, cyber, health, education. So in many respects, the transition from GovTech to SpaceTech was an easy one to make, both thematically and programmatically and relationship-wise as well.
I love it. And can you tell us a little bit about how Seraphim is different from other space tech investors and programs that are working within this now very vast, I don't want to say vertical, it's the only word I can think of, right? But within this category.
Yeah. So, and we view space now as an industry.
Yeah.
So I think if you see, people think of space as astronauts and rockets, and it's way, way, way broader than that. Our interactions with space are tens of interactions each day, be it through your phone, if it's navigation or banking. These are all tools and technologies that are reliant on space. So that why Seraphim, frankly, they're the leading investment fund. They set up first over 8 years ago, which means that what's happened over those 8 years is they have built up a reputation, both as experts and domain experts, but also act as almost a lightning rod for any new startup that is wanting to access investment. So we have a portfolio of 133 companies, of which 109 are through the accelerator program, 10 are through our venture fund, and 18 are through our listed fund. And so we have this spectrum of the early stage as they go through their growth, and I'll say a bit more about accelerator shortly, through to that venture, and then onto that growth. And so the likes of S&T Mobile, which launched their first 2 satellites a few months ago, they're now a $10 billion company. And those are one of our early investments. So Seraphim has built up this reputation. What that means is that the data that we collect is second to none. Right. So we publish every quarter a space index that outlines what are the investment movements in the market. And we see 75% of the global early stage market. So on essentially around 2,000 engagements with early stage companies every year. And so we built up this massive database and picture of what is happening in the market. And I can delve in a bit further as well.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that. I think that one of the things that struck me, and I had guests on before that have taken this approach, is that you all have multiple engagement points, which you just talked about, right? An accelerator, the venture fund, a listed growth fund. We had years ago, AB InBev, their chief growth officer. We've had Comcast's head of startup engagement on, and each of those companies said, the way to win here is to figure out how to help the early stage company, the company that starts to scale, right? And then the one that really needs that growth funding at the end, right, before it becomes a large company of its own. I'm curious if you could talk about Seraphim's approach and why the multiple ways to engage.
Yeah. So in order to pick the winners, you need to see the global context. You need to see what is happening around the world and look at who the leading players are in that and which ones are you likely to back and make your returns on. So obviously we look at the addressable market, the technology, and the team. And what our position as this kind of global conduit of investment transactions is we're able to look at the 10 companies that might come across our desk and say, well, these two over in this territory or geography have already received $70 million worth of investment in their seed round or Series A, or 300 million investment. And to be fair, in space, the capital required is generally double the amount as it would be in a normal, say, a pure play digital venture. So the sums are always much larger. But we're able to take a look at the market and say, right, these are the two that we should back. And if you then look at our success rates, let's just take the accelerator in the first instance, but 109 companies have come through, only 6 of those have failed. So we have a 95% success rate in terms of companies that are succeeding. Not only that, they've gone on to raise $563 million worth of investment. Why is that? In part, and of course, how you attribute success, success has many fathers, etc. But we are a VC-led accelerator. So we focus entirely on educating an entrepreneur on how to raise money. So we're not necessarily interested per se in the product development plan or the go-to-market. What we're interested in is, can you pitch to an investor in such a way that you tell your story, in such a way that they will sign, which means that we will make our money on the next raise. So it's a very distinctive approach around how we take companies through that accelerator. So often, you will have companies who have been through many accelerators, will go on to many accelerators, but we focus just on that how to raise money piece. So that's the accelerator bit. Then in terms of that venture fund, is that some of those companies in the accelerator, we will then go on to invest. Most of them we won't, but we use it as this hopper. And then from there, we'll take the few that need the growth fund. But as part of our network, we have 412 co-investors. So around the world, we're able to draw on this considerable network of investors. And they look to us often to lead, or we'll give at least the nod if investment isn't quite right for us because it's potential competition within our own portfolio. But that's the way we operate.
Does it almost operate like a funnel in a certain sense, in that you have the 109 that go through the accelerator, then there's, whatever the percentage is, 6 of that 109 that then will get the venture fund, which I'm sure is also picking off opportunities that are outside of that, and then a smaller sliver gets to the growth fund. Is that how it kind of all works in concert together?
It's not an unusual model. I'm not going to say it's common model. We are just the leaders in this domain in space. There are other space accelerators. This is the best, and we've got the stats that can prove it. And then if you look at our venture fund, that are and the listed fund, companies have gone on to raise 4.3 billion from the portfolio within the listed fund. Have gone on to raise that. So that ability by the fund managers here and the scouting teams to pick that right company. And give you an example. We don't invest in launch. We don't see how it's a scalable market, and not least, SpaceX is extremely well funded. Yeah. However, if there is a new technology that uses, or should we say, transposes current technology and uses it for a different format, for instance, magnetic levitation, like the bullet trains in Japan, but then applies that to launch principles to essentially have the ability to shoot objects into space through magnetic levitation at thousands of miles per hour, then that's something we would invest in. And that's Auriga is an example of that, a US company who came through our accelerator, and we've also invested in them because they had particularly niche technology.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. Let me ask you this. So you joined the firm to lead Seraphim Space Enterprise, SSE. which in my notes says Global Insights and Acceleration Division. And I know you've talked to that a little bit, but I'm really interested in the insights piece as well as the accelerator. Can you talk a little bit about that as well as your vision for how it evolves over time?
Absolutely. So if you think about the whole space industry, is that there's a problem. You've got this proliferation of companies, investors, products, and there's no real single picture of what that's looking like. And so that makes it very difficult if you are a government. You don't really know where to look at as you develop your strategy, because the data you've got is probably certainly out of date or certainly will be incomplete. If you're a corporate, you're not really sure about what is the right investment to make, strategic investment, either to as an M&A or that or as part of boosting your supply chain. And if you're an investor, having that picture of which are the right companies and having that experienced partner of the due diligence piece is going to be tricky for you to make those right investments. So you've got these series of stakeholders, all of whom face this problem around that lack of insightful data. And so what we've done is we looked at the data that we come in, and some of it is public data, some of it is public but not easily accessible, some of it is proprietary data, some of it is actually just incoming and inbound to us. And the portfolio, the people who invest in our funds, what they are particularly interested in, arguably more so than the actual companies that we invest in, is that quarterly insight that we deliver around what is happening in the market. So we can spot these tools, trends, and technologies that are coming up on the rise, and that's what helps them make strategic decisions. So if you are a government and you've developed your space strategy and it's partly reliant on nurturing your own ecosystem of indigenous space companies, then you need to see the global context of what good looks like. If you're a corporate, are you about to make a poor, costly, strategic decision about acquiring a particular company or technology when you actually don't have the full picture of either a competitor that has actually better value and better product, or that a market's about to drop out in a particular space because that there are going to be many more competitors to that capability coming on the market. So these stakeholders have these problems which we can address from our data, and it comes from our daily contacts that we have inbound with companies. I mean, on average, it's about 200 companies contact us a month, and there's some sort of interaction with them, and that builds up then a picture of what is happening in the market, and that's how we deliver the index. I should say the other thing, the factor in this, what's happened in space, is the rise of dual use technologies. So these are technologies that have both a defense and security application, but also a civilian. So an example would be satellite technology that examines crop rotations or crop deforestation as a result of a hurricane or some sort of climate event. That same technology can be deployed to monitor troop or asset movement in a particular geography. So you have these rise of technologies with this dual use component. And what's happened in the past nearly 3 years with the war in Ukraine, that's fueled a lot of the developments in space technologies, not with the sole defense use, but with this dual use, that something's been developed for defense can also be used in civilian mode. And that's particularly prescient in the whole climate and sustainability space.
Oh, absolutely. There was something that you mentioned in the prep going into our interview today that I thought, like, it shook me. I almost wanted to just start with this question because I thought it was so smart. But right now, a lot of organizations around the world are thinking about AI, right? We run one of the largest AI accelerators in the world. I would say 85% of our clients, that's the first thing they're asking us about. And they're thinking about AI and thinking about how to build out their AI strategy. But you challenged, should they be thinking about a space strategy?
Yeah.
And I think that's just such an interesting question. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. So I was at an event in November in London with some senior civil servants and senior defense folks. And at the end of my session, there was about 100 or so folks in the room. And I was on a panel. And one of the other panelists was the proponent of AI, and another one was about quantum. And at the end of my section, I just asked everyone to put their hand up if they had an AI strategy. So, who here has an AI strategy? And 90 out of the 100 hands go up. And then I said, right, who here has a space strategy? And 88 of those 90 hands go down. So it's really obvious that this is not yet on people's radars, but it is going to be. And you'll see this explosion in interest. It's a conversion strategy. You're getting people unaware, really, that it's impacting their life or their business, to being aware how much it impacts, to then really thinking a bit more detail and considering the impacts on their business, to then familiarizing themselves with how it is going to impact on their business, to then actually, right, we need to commit to a strategy. Because every company will be a space business in the next decade, whether they think they are or not. Because chances are, in some shape or form, in terms of how they either consume or produce data, will have a bearing on space, and that either data or the architecture that comes from it. So, great to have an AI strategy. You got to think ahead and think about your space strategy, because that will be the differentiating factor against your competitors, and that's how you'll win out. And because it is so profound what is going to happen, so for instance, what's the impact on biotech? How pharma companies are able to lengthen and extend the patents they have, because if they're developing or developing their vaccines in space, it adds to the capability and the patent length of time. So these microgravity laboratories that you'll see are just one example of how pharmaceutical, which touches all our lives, is going to be thinking about the space question as part of their production and ongoing revenues.
It's so interesting. So I'll get you out of here on this, and I almost feel like we need to have a second episode to dive into this. But you're an innovation ecosystem builder. Prior to space, you spent 10 years in government, and you talked a little bit about the challenges of that, right? And being a change agent in a regulated world that's regulated for a reason. And I think about this when we talk about pharma, or we think about fintech, right? All these different industries, everybody's regulated. And so I'm curious if you have any advice from that experience and or your transition into the world of space here for other change agents that are thinking about how to navigate new and different in a very regulated world.
So, there are always two sides to that coin, because you've got the change makers who are coming as entrepreneurs, and you've got the change makers who are coming as, should we say, organizational professionals. So that might be civil servants, it might be service owners in whatever company. So what you're looking for is that bridge builder. You're looking for a translator to help understand the language and cultures of different types of organizations. So for instance, for the government side of things, and I set up Europe's first GovTech program back in 2015, which was called CivTech, and that was then replicated by governments around the world. And then from there, I built this global network called the GovTech Global Alliance. So essentially, it was this network of innovation nodes and teams around the world that we could then come together and chat around what were the latest developments in actually helping your own organization, in many respects, see sense of how to do things differently. So you need these teams who are at the nexus, and much like venture fuel, you're bridge builders between it's not so much public versus private, it's large versus small, and that ability to translate those two sides. So that's the first thing. You want to find that. Secondly, if you are internal within an organization, one of the biggest learnings I had from government was you've got laws, rules, and guidance. So laws actually tend to be quite flexible, but we put rules around them, which made it completely inflexible. And then the guidance would actually bear no resemblance to the law, it would bear resemblance to the rules. So point 2 is have a good set of lawyers who can tell you the difference between what is flexible within the law and what is not. And so having people on your team who are open-minded, we had a great set of lawyers when I was working in Scotland. So they helped us navigate and understand what was legally possible, as opposed to what was institutionally restrictive. And I think the third thing is that if you are, people who are listening to Venture for Your podcast will get this anyway, so I appreciate I'm speaking to the converted here, but when you've got people who want to do things differently, you need to support them. And as an organization, you need to give them that support, that permission to fail, because innovation is all about building on the failures. And for people in large organizations, again, no, it's not public versus private, it's large versus small. That's really difficult. And there's so many barriers that are set up to close people in. So you've got to support them and actually think about what if rather than, why. When someone in your team comes to you and say, actually, here's an idea. What if we did it like this?
Yeah, I love it. I love the what if framework. It's so powerful. Alexander, where can people go to learn more about you, the work you're doing at Seraphim?
Brilliant. So go to seraphim.vc, and then it'll direct you to, I think in the US, will become Generation Space, or rest of the world where it's Seraphim. And then if you will see on the website either Accelerator and shortly to come Insights. And the whole Insights product is helping you navigate new space with data-driven clarity and helping you make those multi-million-pound decisions and the right ones. So seraphim.vc is where you'll find me. And if you want to message me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Alexander Holt. And, I'll happily. And if you mention that you were listening to this on the Venture Fuel podcast, then I'll be even more receptive to any contact around it.
Amazing. Well, Alexander, thank you so much for your time today, but your insights both on this podcast and that we can now go read, and for everything you're doing to spark change. It's an amazing journey that you've been on, and we're excited to follow along on the next great frontiers and adventures ahead.
Well, thanks so much, Fred, and thanks to you and your team for inviting me on. And no, this is a great platform. So very much appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts in this, excuse the pun, space.